Okay, so let's start with the polyurethane and how to apply that. I'm going to apply it down the side here and across the base. So I'll grab my General Finishes High Performance in Satin, and there are other products out there, so I do definitely encourage you to try other brands, especially if you're in a different country and you can't get hold of this. This is an American brand, so you can definitely get it in the US and Canada as well. Now what I like to do is to decant it when I'm working. I think it's a really good way of ensuring that this doesn't get contaminated, especially when you're using it over wood surfaces. It can pick up the dust, it can pick up the colour, and that can get deposited back in your can, and you want to keep that as clean as possible, because when you start to use it over other areas you might see the traces of what it's picked up. So I use, like, this is obviously very well used, but I use like a takeaway container, ready meal container. They're really handy, keeps it nice and airtight, but it's also a really good size for my applicator to fit in when I'm sort of actually applying it. So this one's been very well used, let's say. So I'll just pour the product in there. Now what I actually like to use, if I can find it, there we are. If you do pour, so just make sure to clean the neck of it, because it can get very hard to get the lid on eventually, is I like to use a really big, it's like a jumbo syringe. So they're quite handy for getting product out and neatly into the box, like so. So small quantities, because then you're not going to throw away too much. If you get lots of bits in there, or it gets discoloured from going over the wood, you're not going to lose much. So just small amounts at a time. Plus, with it being water-based, while we're working in that, that is going to start to dry out. So we want to keep it as fresh as possible while working. Now the other thing to say about top coating, this is going to be really easy because it's over a dark colour, but top coating over lights can show up a lot of things. It can show up a lot of dust specks, a lot of bits of fluff, hair, everything, and it's actually furniture refinishers nightmare, really, because it's really hard to avoid. All those bits are in the air and it just seems to attract them. So I give you a few simple tips that will help reduce that, and it would be to, if you've got long hair like myself, tie it back. If you're working somewhere that's got carpets and cushions, try and sort of either elevate what you're working on off the floor, don't work on the carpet. If you can go somewhere that hasn't got soft furnishings, even better. Keep your pets away, keep the doors shut in the area where you're going to be. Some people like to mist the air because then it brings that dust down, and move around quite gently. Silly things. And if you're using light colours, even wearing something light coloured can help. So little tips that can make that top coating a bit easier. Now I'm going to be doing this on the side because it's easier. You could actually, while you're getting the hang of it and sort of getting the consistency sort of flowing right off your applicator, if you feel more comfortable, put your piece onto its side so you're actually using it on a flat surface, and you don't have to worry about it rolling off quite as much. Obviously I know quite how much to put on my applicator and how to sort of how much to take off before I apply it, so it's not going to run everywhere, but that might be a good tip for starting out till you get that sort of feel for it. Now I'm going to use for this an applicator. So this is a sponge wrapped with a sort of microfiber. So this is great for staining and for any kinds of finishes. And you can get stuff like this quite easily on the market. The cleaning aisle has sort of little sponges. You can get these in most DIY shops as well. So you just want to look for something that's got a very soft sort of fleecy exterior with a sponge inside, or a very fine sponge. So like a baby sponge. Another option you can do is get a regular sponge and use a pop sock over it, because that gives you that softish, fine surface. What you don't want is a sponge that's got large holes in it, because you're going to get bubbles, you're going to get sort of more texture than you want. So you want a fine, soft surface. So either microfiber or grab a sponge and put a little pop sock over it, which is a good way to do it. Another thing that I quite like to use, I tend to use this more for staining, for the Pollux oils and that sort of thing, is this is a Gen poly brush. And this is sort of the daddy of poly brushes, basically, foam brushes, because it's really, really dense, fine sponge, whereas the cheaper ones on the market, they are got bigger holes and they will leave bubbles. So, and these don't bend in the same way either, they're really, really stiff. So I tend to use these sort of things. when I'm applying my top coat. Now I've got a applicator on the go, which I've actually got in another box to keep it fresh. Saves you washing these things up, you see. So I'm going to just do it, and because I don't mind if I get a little bit sort of on top of here. I'm just going to do it here and down, and then I'll show you the rest. So I'm just going to dip it straight down into the top coat, and then use the side to wipe off the excess gently, not pushing it too hard. I don't want to remove too much because it'll dry out. So if it's the first time you've used it, you might want to do it a couple of times, just like you would a roller, to make sure that it's absorbed enough into the sponge. And we're not going to press down really too hard because it will come out too quickly then. And so I'm just going to use a wiping technique as if wiping with a wet cloth, really. Now you can see there's a little dribble there, which I'll just pick up. And if you get the sort of overlaps where there's too much product, you can go over it again, just smooth it down. Just like painting, don't worry about your first coat being perfect, because we can always fix that. So get another one. And similarly with painting, we go over it a few times, but then we leave it alone. We don't want to drag it too much. If you spy anything in the your finish and you want to take it off, you just use the tips of a dry brush, and you can look in the light and you can just pick any little bits that land up and remove them. Do it straight away rather than later. Now I've got a few drips down the bottom, so I'm actually going to use a regular brush like I would use for painting, soft, square, flat brush, and then I'll use that for the detail. And again, it's just, you just want a thin layer, merely wetting the surface, like so. Again, in the direction of the grain, that's what we're doing all the way throughout, although you get very little brush strokes from this kind of product because it's so forgiving. But then I'm going to also observe and go around the other side and check that there's no little dribbles. And anywhere you see it white, where it's sort of gathered, you want to just smooth that out, because that will dry and set up like that. So just want to make sure there's no excess, smooth it all out. And again, like painting, we're going to look from every angle to make sure we've got all the bits. There we go. Sometimes I just sort of run my hand under the edges to make sure nothing's dribbled down. Obviously we could turn this upside down and do other parts of the top coating as well. And that will dry really quickly because it's water-based. The water evaporates out of it. Dry in 20 minutes, you could coat again. And I'm going to put 3 to 4 coats on to get that really strong, resilient finish. When that is dry, what I will do, exactly the same as when I'm painting, is I'll grab a synthetic sanding pad. Now this is a 220 rather than 180, so I've gone finer, and I'll just give it a very light sand over the top, because what you'll find is little bits will have landed in that. Even if you can't see them, there'll be little specks of dust, and you just get a little bit of a prickle that you can feel when you run your hand over it when it's dry, obviously. So I will then use that just to knock those off very, very lightly, almost like no more than that. And then I'll coat again, because if you leave it, obviously the next coat can sort of highlight those little imperfections. Certainly over your wood, you are going to use your sanding pad to knock that back, because the very first coat is going to raise that grain and make it feel prickly. So we will go over that, we will knock back that prickle from the wood, and then we'll go again with our second coat. And of course, as before, once we've done that, we will get our tack cloth, and we will use that to pick up any sort of sanding dust. So I'll show you that when I come to do the fronts of the doors. Okay, so I'll just show you this working on the horizontal on the actual doors, because that tends to be how I top coat. You can obviously see that the back of these I've already used the polyurethane on there, so those were done this way. Just find it's a lot easier to work that way. So now I need to do this side with the Pollox oil. So what I'll do is I'm just bringing in a couple of pieces of wood. You can use the painting pyramids again. I'm just a bit more wary of using them on finished surfaces because they can leave a little mark, a depression in the wood and in the paint. So I'm just going to use these pieces of wood, and that will raise the door off the table, so that basically I can check for any drips as I go around. Okay. Let's take the excess off again. So it's plenty of product in there. Now I just need to put that somewhere because I need to be able to hold on to this, and then smoothly from one end to the other. I just a little bit more on that actually. You don't want to put too much on. It needs to be quite thin and then smooth down. So again, I'm looking in the light to make sure it's gone into all the areas properly. Just going over the top of it. You've got a lot longer to work with this kind of product than you have with a water-based polyurethane, because obviously it's got, this one particularly is 4 hours to dry, so you can smooth it over as much as you like. And then what I do is just check the edges for dribbles. That looks all right. We'll leave that 4 hours and then I'll come back and I'll do the little light sand ready to recoat again. Okay, so that coat is dry, it's been left overnight, and now I'm just going to give it a very light sand to denib, which takes off the little raised particles in the wood grain, and also any little bits in the polyurethane as well, where I've top coated over the paint. So I'll just use my 220 sanding pad. Paying a bit more attention to the wood area because this is going to be rougher than the painted area. Yeah, feels good. When you get onto your second coat and beyond, you can actually use this sanding pad to sort of smooth those edges of your design as well. And that helps smooth out that sort of raised feel and give you a nice sort of wipeable surface at the end. So after I've done that, I get my tack cloth and just bunch it up and very lightly pick up that sanding dust, ready to go again. So the same in here, when you run your hand over it, you just feel a little tiny prickle, a few little specks, so I'm not really putting much pressure on it. And it's not a very long job, it's just a quick whiz over basically. Of course, if there's any little dribbles or things you need to sort out, give those a bit more attention and maybe go to a slightly coarser pad if you need to, but that should be enough if you've got quite a smooth coat. That will raise the door off the table so that basically I can check for any drips. So on the door here, I can feel that it is a little bit prickly where all the wood grain is swollen up. You don't want to press too hard, you don't want to sort of rub into the surface, it's just literally to take that little fuzz off. So not necessarily doing it with the grain, because I just want to take that little prickle away. And that feels so much better. Very light dust. I'm ready to go again. I usually do 3 coats in total and do that light denibbing sanding in between, but just don't do it after the last coat.